As I said earlier, with the strong lights and the deep shadows. Many people thought the social Darwinism of Sumner and Spencer was very, very cruel, and Beecher's reconciliation of it with Christianity a fraud. And from the West, as the century ended, there came a voice especially rich in skepticism, even ridicule.
The discipline of savage life has been by far the most protracted in all the life history of the race, so that by heredity, human nature still is and must indefinitely continue to be savage human nature.
Spencer and Sumner held that the millionaires were selected by a savage, barbarian world. Maybe they were only the most successful of the barbarians. That was the thesis of the man we now meet. The preeminent critic of the manners and morals of the great American capitalists grew up on this Minnesota farm. Thorstein Veblen was born in 1857 and died in 1929. In the history of economics, sociology, and social science, he is unique. There has been no one, absolutely no one, who was even remotely like him. The legend has always been of a poor Norwegian farm boy who was driven by a burning sense of injustice. Veblen's father was indeed a poor immigrant from Norway, but he was a hard-working, intelligent man, and by this time his son was reaching maturity, he was a man of modest wealth. He owned 290 acres of the best land to be found outdoors, and not 100 working farmers, I would judge, back in Norway could have been as affluent as he was. Those who have to make it the hard way have often resented the rich. Why should so few have so much? What justifies their higher income and station? This kind of attack, the rich can always stand. It can be said that it proceeds from envy, and in the end, it affirms their superiority. The Veblen weapon was far more refined. It was ridicule presented as the most somber and careful science. All primitive tribes had their festivals and rituals and orgies, and some of them were exceptionally depraved, and likewise the rich. Their social observances and rituals might be different from those of the savages, differences different in form and detail, but their purpose was the same: self-advertisement, exhibitionism. And for every exhibitionist mannerism or enjoyment of the rich, Veblen came up with some deplorable barbarian counterpart. The Vanderbilts bound up their women in corsets, thus proving that they were purely objects of enjoyment and display. And the Papuan chief carved up the faces and the breasts of his wives to precisely the same end. Veblen could do wonders even with a walking stick.
The walking stick serves the purpose of an advertisement that the bearer's hands are employed otherwise than in useful effort, and it therefore has utility as an evidence of leisure. But it is also a weapon, and it meets a felt need of barbarian man on that ground. The handling of so tangible and primitive a means of offense is very comforting to anyone who is gifted with even a moderate share of ferocity.
Veblen was educated here at Carleton College, only a few miles from the farm. He went on briefly to Johns Hopkins and then to Yale, where, of all things, he was a favored student of William Graham Sumner. Veblen's first and greatest book, The Theory of the Leisure Class, is a study of how the rich seek self-distinction from the use of their riches, their wealth. It's from this book that the great phrases, conspicuous consumption, conspicuous leisure, the predatory culture, pecuniary emulation, phrases that we still hear come down to us. As a critique of manners, the book had a profound effect on manners. Never again would ostentatious expenditure, be so enjoyable. Let the house be too vast, the party too lavish, the women too garish, the diamonds too glittering, and you could count on some killjoy coming along to cite Veblen. Conspicuous consumption, the Papuans again. The book could not have been better timed, because just as the theory of the leisure class was being published, the classic center of conspicuous consumption in the United States was rising, and this was at Newport, Rhode Island. I last saw these houses one pleasant autumn day in 1961. Prime Minister Jawaharlal Nehru was visiting President Kennedy, who was staying here in Newport. The president brought him along here on the waterfront in the Honeyfitz, the presidential yacht. "I wanted you to see, Prime Minister," the president said, "how the average American lives." He could have said that these houses were the supreme example of Thorstein Veblen's conspicuous consumption. They belonged to an age when a man's worth was measured in simple, straightforward fashion by his money. When artists and poets and politicians, scientists and sociologists did not dream of disputing the rich man's claim to eminence, and when Hollywood had not been heard from, and when television personalities were not even a dream. But wealth, if it were to distinguish a man, had to be known. He couldn't walk around brandishing $1,000 bills or a statement of his net worth, although it must be said that some tried. So these houses were not places of habitation, recreation, procreation. They proclaimed, they advertised the wealth and therefore the worth of the inmates. In the economic and social history of the last century, one name recurs in our hearing again and again, and that's Vanderbilt. And there's good reason. The Commodore was greatly distinguished for the way he acquired money. He was a builder, and that shouldn't be forgotten. He also robbed the public as distinct from the stockholder, and we've seen that's much better for a man's reputation. He also did this with a forthright candor. He was an honest monopolist, and no family consumed so conspicuously. The most spectacular of the Vanderbilt creations was here at Newport, the breakers. It cost $3 million. The Vanderbilts are also immortalized by Vanderbilt University, although that cost only $500,000, later raised to $1 million. A vast army of servants was needed to run these establishments. These were trained in disciplined obedience and obeisance, and in the other manners fitting to a subordinate. And this, too, affirmed the superior station of the owners. As Veblen also observed in a notable passage,
"It is a serious grievance if a gentleman's butler or footman performs his duties about his master's